The Scariest Night of My Life, a collection of Irish ghost stories. Ireland is a land steeped in history, myth and legend. Its rolling hills and ancient forests hide secrets that have been whispered through the ages, and its grand estates and castles, once filled with laughter and life, now stand as silent witnesses to the passage of time. But some places are never truly empty. Some places remember the people who lived there, the tragedies that unfolded, and the darkness that lingers. These 5 stories recount encounters with that lingering darkness, nights when the veil between the living and the dead was thin, and terror became all too real. This is the scariest night of my life. The Shadow at Fermanagh's Florence Court. Nestled deep in the heart of County Fermanagh, Florence Court is an imposing Georgian mansion surrounded by dense forests. The estate, once home to the Earls of Enniskillen, now stands as a relic of the past, its grandeur fading into the wilderness. Despite its beauty, the house has a dark reputation. Locals whisper of strange happenings, unexplainable sounds, and the appearance of a shadowy figure said to roam its halls. Being part of a small paranormal investigation group, I couldn't resist the chance to explore the mansion after hours. The night was crisp, the kind where the wind howls through the trees and makes every rustle seem like footsteps behind you. My group of 5, armed with cameras, voice recorders, and a range of other gadgets, entered the mansion around 10 p.m. Everything seemed normal at first, silent, still, and abandoned, the perfect setting for a ghost hunt. We wandered through the grand halls, our footsteps echoing off the stone floors, casting long shadows under the dim moonlight streaming through the tall windows. As the hours ticked by, nothing out of the ordinary occurred, and the tension began to ease. That is, until I wandered downstairs alone. The lower chambers of Florence Court are less preserved than the upper levels, damp and filled with the smell of decay, with the walls flaking from centuries of moisture. There was a distinct chill in the air, more than just the autumn cold. It was as though the atmosphere had thickened. The air was heavy, making it difficult to breathe. And then I felt it. A presence. It wasn't something I could see or hear, but it was there. My skin prickled, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end as I made my way through the narrow corridor. Just as I turned the corner into a darkened room, I saw it. A shadow, darker than the surrounding blackness, stood against the far wall. It wasn't shaped like a human figure. It was amorphous, like smoke, yet it felt malevolent, like it was staring directly into my soul. My heart began to race, the sound of my own blood pounding in my ears. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. My eyes were locked on that shadow, and in that moment I was filled with an overwhelming sense of dread. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place. Time seemed to warp around me. The air grew colder, and my breath became visible in the dim light of my flashlight, now flickering as if struggling to stay alive. Suddenly, the door behind me slammed shut, echoing through the narrow stone hallways. The sound snapped me out of my trance, and I bolted toward the door, pulling and yanking at the handle. It wouldn't budge. My breathing became frantic, chest tightening as panic set in. I was trapped in the dark with that thing, and then I felt it, icy fingers brushing the back of my neck. I screamed louder than I ever had in my life. My voice echoed through the chamber, but no one came. I banged on the door, and after what felt like an eternity, it finally flew open with a gust of cold air. I sprinted upstairs, my footsteps thundering against the stone floors, not daring to look back. When I reached the grand foyer, my group was waiting for me, confused looks on their faces. They hadn't heard the door slam. They hadn't heard me scream. They didn't see the shadow. But the look on my face must have said it all. That night, I left Florence Court and swore never to return. I couldn't shake the feeling of those cold fingers on my neck or the sight of that shadowy figure lurking in the dark. To this day, I can't explain what happened in that room, but I know one thing for certain. There are some places we are not meant to explore, and Florence Court is one of them. The Screaming Woman of Tollymore Forest. Tollymore Forest Park in County Down is a place of stunning natural beauty, with its ancient trees, cascading rivers, and picturesque trails that stretch for miles. The forest is popular with hikers and campers, especially during the autumn months when the leaves turn golden and the crisp air fills your lungs. I had been there a few times before with friends, and we decided one October to do something we'd never tried before: camp overnight in the woods. The evening started perfectly. We set up our tents in a secluded spot near the Shimna River, the sound of rushing water creating a peaceful background. As night fell, we sat around the campfire, telling ghost stories, laughing, and enjoying the serenity of the forest. It wasn't until around 1 a.m. that things took a sinister turn. I was the first to hear it, a high-pitched scream in the distance, so faint that I thought I had imagined it. I paused, straining my ears, but it was gone. Not wanting to alarm the others, I brushed it off and went back to listening to the crackling fire. Then it came again, louder this time, unmistakable. The sound of a woman screaming, filled with terror. I looked at my friends. They had heard it too, and the jovial atmosphere vanished, replaced with an uneasy silence. The scream came again, echoing through the forest, as if it was bouncing off the trees from every direction. It was closer now. My heart pounded as I grabbed a flashlight and stood up. "Someone's in trouble," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. My friends hesitated, but followed as I headed in the direction of the screams. The deeper we went into the forest, the darker and more oppressive it became. The trees seemed to close in on us, their twisted branches forming eerie silhouettes against the night sky. After what felt like an eternity, we reached a small clearing. The screams had stopped, leaving behind an unsettling silence that made my skin crawl. In the middle of the clearing stood a woman. Her back was to us, and she was dressed in a torn, white gown that fluttered slightly in the breeze. She was completely still, her hair hanging in long, tangled strands down her back. I called out to her, but she didn't move. Something about her felt wrong, unnatural. My gut twisted with fear, but I took a step forward, determined to help. That's when she turned around. Her face was a grotesque, contorted mask of agony, her mouth wide open as if mid-scream, but no sound came out. Her eyes, sunken, dark and hollow, locked onto mine, and I felt a cold wave of terror wash over me. Before I could react, she let out a deafening, blood-curdling scream that seemed to come from everywhere at once, filling the air with its horrific intensity. I stumbled back, frozen with fear, as the woman began to move toward us. My legs finally obeyed, and I turned to run, my friends right behind me. We didn't stop running until we reached the campsite, breathless and shaking. The woman's scream echoed in my mind long after it faded into the night. We packed up our things in a frenzy and left Tollymore Forest before sunrise. I haven't been back since, and I don't plan to. That scream still haunts me, and I know that whatever I saw in that clearing wasn't human. The blood-red room of Kilronan Castle. Kilronan Castle, perched on the edge of Lough Meala in County Roscommon, is a place where the line between luxury and legend blurs. Once the stronghold of the McDermotts, a powerful Gaelic family, it now operates as a high-end hotel. But beneath its polished veneer and modern comforts lies a history steeped in tragedy and bloodshed. I was unaware of the castle's haunted past when I booked a weekend getaway there, hoping for nothing more than a peaceful retreat. Little did I know, the castle had its own plans for me. The first night passed uneventfully. The grand corridors, the rich tapestries, and the flickering fire in the lobby made for a cozy and enchanting atmosphere. My room was on the second floor, overlooking the lake, and as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment. The second night was different. After a long day of exploring the nearby woods and historical sites, I returned to the castle feeling tired but oddly restless. Something about the air felt thicker, like an invisible weight pressing down on me. As I made my way to my room, the corridor seemed darker, the flickering lights casting strange shadows on the walls. I chalked it up to exhaustion and dismissed the growing unease in my chest. At around 2 a.m., I woke abruptly. I wasn't sure why at first. There hadn't been a sound, no knocking or creaking. Yet my heart was pounding in my chest, as if I had been startled awake by something unseen. The room felt different, colder than it should have been, considering the fire I had left burning in the hearth. As I sat up in bed, I noticed a strange glow. It wasn't the soft orange of the fireplace, but a deep, pulsating red, as though the very walls of the room were bleeding light. I blinked, trying to adjust my eyes to the strange illumination, but the more I looked, the more unsettling it became. The entire room was bathed in this eerie red glow, and it seemed to seep from the walls themselves. My breath hitched in my throat. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, a sensation so strong that my body reacted instinctively. My skin prickled with goosebumps, and my heart pounded louder in my ears. Something was wrong. Very, very wrong. I fumbled for the lamp on my bedside table, hoping the artificial light would break the strange atmosphere. But when I flicked the switch, nothing happened. The red glow persisted, unwavering. I turned toward the door, thinking about leaving the room to find someone, anyone, who could explain what was happening. That's when I saw it. In the far corner of the room, near the heavy velvet drapes, stood a figure. At first I thought it was a shadow cast by the strange red light, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was something much more solid. The figure was tall, unnervingly tall, with long, gaunt limbs and a hunched posture, as though it had been standing there for centuries, waiting. I couldn't make out its face. It was hidden in the deep shadows, but the figure's presence radiated malevolence. My blood ran cold when I noticed something else. Its hands. They were dripping with blood, crimson droplets falling silently to the floor, forming small, dark pools on the plush carpet. I stared in disbelief, frozen in place. The figure didn't move. It didn't speak. It just stood there, watching me, its hands slowly leaking blood. My throat was dry, and I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. I was paralyzed by fear, unable to break eye contact with the shadowy figure. The room felt smaller, as if the walls were closing in around me. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at this thing, but time seemed to slow to a crawl. The air in the room grew colder, so cold that I could see my breath in front of me, forming small clouds in the red light. My mind raced, desperately trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was this some kind of nightmare? Had I fallen asleep again? Without warning, the figure began to move. Slowly, it lifted one blood-stained hand and extended it toward me. My body screamed at me to move, to run, but I couldn't. It was as if I was glued to the bed, a prisoner in my own skin. The figure took one step forward, then another, its hand outstretched, reaching for me. The closer it got, the heavier the air became, suffocating and cold. I could smell the metallic tang of blood now, thick and overwhelming. My chest tightened as panic set in. I needed to get out. I needed to escape. Summoning every ounce of strength I had left, I finally managed to move. I bolted upright, throwing myself out of bed and stumbling toward the door. My hands fumbled with the lock, shaking so violently that it took me what felt like an eternity to open it. Finally, the door gave way, and I burst out into the corridor, gasping for breath. The hallway was dark and empty, but it felt like a haven compared to the nightmare inside my room. I didn't stop running until I reached the lobby, where I found one of the night staff. I must have looked like a madwoman, babbling incoherently about blood and shadows, because the staff member's eyes widened in concern. I refused to go back to that room. I spent the rest of the night in the lobby, huddled on a sofa, staring at the grand fireplace, trying to convince myself it had all been a terrible dream. But the next morning, when I gathered the courage to retrieve my things, I found something that chilled me to the bone. The carpet near the drapes was stained dark red, exactly where the figure had stood. I left Kilronan Castle that day and never returned. To this day, I can't explain what happened in that room, but I know one thing for certain. There is something in that castle that does not belong in this world, and it is far from finished with those who enter its walls. The Phantom Horses of Enniscorthy Bridge. The town of Enniscorthy, nestled along the banks of the River Slaney in County Wexford, is known for its charming streets and historical significance. The Enniscorthy Bridge, an unassuming stone structure, connects both sides of the town, but few know about its darker history. During the Irish Rebellion of 1798, the bridge became the site of a brutal conflict between the local rebels and British forces. The fighting here was so fierce that some said the river ran red with blood. The soldiers who fell at the bridge were said to have been left in the water for days, their bodies drifting along the current. They say that on some nights you can still hear the sounds of those who died there, the distant echoes of gunfire, the clash of metal, and the screams of the fallen. But the strangest legend surrounding Enniscorthy Bridge speaks of phantom horses charging across the bridge in the dead of night. I had heard the stories as a child growing up in Wexford, but I never put much stock in them. Ghost stories, I thought, were for scaring tourists and entertaining kids. But one late autumn night, I was walking home from a friend's house, and I experienced something I will never forget. The air that night was cool and crisp, with a thick mist rising off the River Slaney, shrouding the town in an eerie glow. As I approached the bridge, the familiar structure seemed different, darker, more menacing in the fog. I hesitated at the edge, something in my gut telling me to turn back, but I shook off the feeling. After all, it was just a bridge. Just another quiet walk home in the night. But as I stepped onto the bridge, the temperature seemed to drop dramatically. I could see my breath clouding in front of me, and an oppressive silence settled over the area, broken only by the faint lapping of water against the stone. I quickened my pace, eager to cross and leave the strange feeling behind. That's when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of hooves clattering on the stone behind me. At first, I thought it was just a late-night rider, though it seemed odd for anyone to be riding through town at this hour. But when I turned around to look, there was nothing. No horse, no rider, only the thick, swirling mist that obscured the street behind me. The hooves grew louder, thundering now, as if a team of horses was charging down the bridge. My heart raced, and my mind scrambled for an explanation. But the noise was undeniable. The sound of hooves echoed louder, pounding faster, growing closer by the second. Panic surged through me, and I broke into a run. But the bridge felt endless, each step taking me nowhere, and the sound of hooves seemed to surround me, coming from every direction. Halfway across, I turned, desperate to see what was chasing me. That's when I saw them. 4 massive, ghostly horses galloping through the mist. Their eyes were wild, their mouths foaming as they bore down on me, their hooves striking the cobblestones with such force that I swore the bridge trembled beneath my feet. But there were no riders. Just the horses, spectral and terrifying, as if they had been summoned from some distant battlefield, their souls forever bound to the bridge. I was paralyzed, unable to move as they thundered toward me. Just when I thought they would trample me, they disappeared, vanishing into the mist as quickly as they had appeared. The silence that followed was deafening. My chest heaved, my heart pounded in my ears, but the sound of the hooves had gone, leaving only the soft sound of the river below. I stood there, gasping for breath, unsure of what I had just witnessed. The mist slowly lifted, and the bridge returned to its quiet, empty state. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. The phantom horses of Enniscorthy Bridge were real, a spectral reminder of the battles fought long ago. Since that night, I've never walked across Enniscorthy Bridge after dark. I've heard others talk about strange sounds and ghostly sightings, but I know what I saw. I know that somewhere in the fog, those horses are still running, trapped between the world of the living and the dead, waiting for their next rider, or their next victim. The Crying Child of Belvelly Castle. Belvelly Castle in County Cork stands on the shores of Great Island, its ancient stone walls weathered by centuries of wind and rain. Though it appears much like any other old Irish castle, Belvelly has a chilling past that few are willing to speak of. In the late 1600s, the castle was home to the Cromwell family, who lived there with their young daughter, Maeve. The story goes that Maeve, a lively and curious child, disappeared one summer afternoon while playing near the water's edge. Despite an exhaustive search, her body was never found. Some claimed that the tide had taken her, while others believed she had been abducted. But over the years, whispers of her ghost began to circulate. Stories of a child's voice heard crying for help near the castle walls, and sightings of a small figure standing at the water's edge, her eyes wide with fear. I didn't know any of this when my friend, a local historian, invited me to stay at Belvelly Castle for a weekend of research. We were working on a documentary about haunted places in Ireland, and the castle's recent restoration made it a prime location. I was excited for the trip, hoping to catch some great footage and maybe, just maybe, experience something paranormal. But I wasn't prepared for the terror that awaited me. The first day was uneventful. We spent the afternoon exploring the grounds, filming interviews and capturing shots of the castle from various angles. By the time night fell, I was exhausted and ready to turn in. My room was at the top of a narrow, winding staircase, its window overlooking the dark waters of the bay. The old bed creaked as I lay down, the wind howling outside, and before long I drifted into a deep sleep. But in the dead of night, I awoke to the sound of crying. At first I thought it was the wind playing tricks on my mind, but as I lay there, the sound grew louder, more distinct. It was the unmistakable sobbing of a child, heart-wrenching and filled with despair. I sat up, straining to hear. The crying seemed to echo through the castle's stone halls, bouncing off the walls, growing louder with each passing second. I threw on my coat, grabbed a flashlight, and made my way down the stairs, following the sound. It led me through the darkened corridors, past ancient tapestries and forgotten rooms, until I reached the front door. The crying continued, now louder than ever, coming from outside, near the water. I hesitated before stepping out into the night, the cold air biting at my skin. My breath puffed in front of me as I followed the sound toward the shore. And then, there she was. A small girl, drenched from head to toe, her long hair hanging in wet strands around her face. She stood at the water's edge, her back to me, her tiny body shaking with sobs. "Maeve?" I whispered, though I didn't expect an answer. The girl didn't move. She just stood there, crying softly. I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest, but as I reached out to touch her, she vanished, disappearing into the mist as if she had never been there at all. I stood frozen, my mind racing, unsure of what I had just seen. The crying had stopped, and the night was eerily silent. I hurried back to the castle, locking the door behind me, but sleep was impossible. The image of that crying child haunted me, her sobs echoing in my mind long after they had faded into the night. I left Belvelly Castle the next morning, unable to shake the feeling that Maeve's spirit was still there, trapped by the water's edge, forever searching for someone to hear her cries. These 5 stories are but a glimpse into the haunted history that lies hidden in the corners of Ireland. Each tale tells of nights when the supernatural became undeniable, when shadows took form, and the living encountered the echoes of the past. Ireland's haunted places, from ancient castles to quiet bridges, remind us that some spirits never rest, and for those who dare to cross paths with them, the scariest night of their life might be just around the corner. Would you dare to visit these places, or would you, like those who lived through it, flee and never look back?